This video has two subjects. The first is how to draw a bird, and the second equal one is how to crosshatch, because a bird is a great example of the issues that confront us when we go to do hatching and cross-hatching. Now, this is an Australian magpie. It's a mottled grey colour, not because it's sick or old, but because it's an adolescent. So its lovely glossy black feathers haven't come in yet, but from the look of it, they're just starting to. This bird was sitting on a fence near the railway station as I walked past, and he did not move. He must have been about 60 centimetres from me and just eyeballed me as I walked past. So speaking of eyeballs, eyes are particularly important with, well, almost any creature that has them when we draw, but with birds, they really are the distinctive, the animated feature of the face in a drawing. And so it's really important to really capture the eye and something of a sparkle in the eye. If we just settle for a black pupil inside a white or a black circle, then it's going to look a bit cartoon-like. So one of the first things I do as I establish the head is to actually get the eye done, because if it doesn't turn out at this stage, it's one of the few things that I will restart a drawing for. I think capturing some essence of life in the eyeball of a bird is so important. So having been satisfied that there was enough of a credible looking eyeball to keep going with the drawing, the thing I'm doing now involves the hatching, which is to use my hatching lines, to use these lines that I'm going to use for colour, for local colour, which is black in this case, black and grey, but also for shade and shadow. Well, not actually shadow in this drawing, but for shade. And so by placing lots of lines close together, I create darkness of lighter shades of grey to black. And I can do the lines in one direction, in which case they're hatching or parallel lines, or I can do layer after layer of lines that are in slightly or greatly different directions and crossing them to produce cross-hatching. But before I worry about that any further, I need to establish the form of the bird. Now, birds, I think, it's important where possible to visualize the form, like to get a strong sense of their roundedness in as much detail as we can. So I spent some time looking at this bird and trying to see exactly if I could run my fingers around it, where it came in and came out, or where there were slightly different forms of roundedness that merged into each other. Because these are going to be the key reference points as I draw my lines, but they're also going to be reference points for defining my hatching and cross-hatching lines, because curves are where my hatching lines are going to, if you like, disappear around in some way. Hatching is always, I think, visually most helpful when it follows the form of the object that it's on. And not just follows it, but actually reveals it, establishes it, gives us a chance to see it. And so with a rounded creature or form, such as this bird, then it's important for me to highlight exactly what shape it is, so that if someone had never seen a bird before, they can read the form, if you like, from my lines, not just from the outline to give me an idea of the shape of the bird, but to get a sense of how round it is, of the form, where it comes out, where it goes in, what the various proportions of its body are. To see that the neck, for instance, is made of several sections, and that therefore indicates something of the flexibility and mobility of that part of the bird's body. Now, birds have feathers as well. With this bird, it was a bit tricky because its juvenile feathers were still mostly here, but there was a hint of the adult feathers coming in. The juvenile feathers are fluffy and mottled in colour. So I didn't want to get too complex in what was still a fairly straightforward, a fairly gestural drawing. This magpie took me just over 20 minutes to draw in real time. It's been sped up to 1.5 times. And so now I'm establishing this wing. It's important to work out, if we can, when we're looking at our reference, what parts of the bird we're doing, and to particularly where the body part changes to change our hatching direction. But you can see that my hatching lines generally are representing this sort of somewhat squared barrel shape of the body of the bird. And then as the belly, if you like, curves down away from us, hopefully the lines will get closer together to indicate a bit of foreshortening as well. So we want to use our lines deliberately to give as much information as possible about the bird. Now we're also using these hatching lines for local colour, for the actual colour, and to show variation between colours. Now in this case it's really between black and white, because we're not actually really drawing anything else except for the railing that the bird sits on. Therefore, it's more a case of not putting too many lines where we have the white, so that it comes through as a different colour, and getting an edge into that will help indicate that this is where feathers of different colours join up. There were lots of these sort of scallop-shaped fluffy feathers indicated, and I did work at doing some of those at different stages down the breast of the bird. I'm not sure that was particularly successful, but I did just want to get a few other lines in place that weren't just these horizontal banding lines. And really a lot of it is to look at the reference photo and to check whether the hatching lines I've done are revealing the form adequately, or whether I can come over the top with a slightly different direction that will just improve the modelling, the effect of form that we're creating. The other thing then to bear in mind is where local colour changes as well, and there are quite a number of places where some of the juvenile feathers are giving way to more adult feathers, and so the feathers get darker, and I'm wanting to represent that colour rather than shading by some darker shapes, and to create something of that mottled effect, which also adds just interest to the appearance of the bird, and I hope makes it look a little more bird-like. They're very clever birds. They like to hang around people because they quite happily come up and eat out of our hands. Not that we're meant to do that. It's not really good for them, because in the end people end up giving them things that aren't particularly healthy for them. And worst cases, they lose the learning of how to hunt. So I'm now really doing the fine-tuning part of this. I'm looking at my reference and saying, where do I need to make it darker? Where do I need to put more variation? I've now got the feet to do. I kind of made a mistake with the feet in drawing that horizontal line too soon. I should have actually drawn at least one of the feet completely first, and then brought the piping in so that it was in exactly the right place for where the foot was. Because as it turned out, the line I drew was about 1 to 2 millimeters too high. And although that doesn't sound a great deal, it does create a certain awkwardness, a certain unreality with the way the feet sit on it. And also has the effect of just that little bit shortening the legs, I think. So that's something to remember for the next time I draw a bird sitting on a rail or on a twig. And so I'm adding details now, adding a bit of just darkening for shade on the legs. And all the time I'm looking still at the bird and the shape and the reference, and trying to work out where isn't it as clearly defined as I would like it to be. Or is there some way I would like to make it a bit different. I think I've probably made the bird just a little bit too plump in its lower right section. I think if I could shave 1 or 2 millimeters off that bottom right corner of its breast area, that I would be happier with that. But it was a bit difficult to see just with the photo and the reference and the shadows and the things that were behind it, I'll say in my defense. So my cross-hatching all the time before I put the pen on paper, I need to be aware of what shape, what direction is the surface going that I'm going to put it over the top of. And if I already have a layer of lines there, how am I going to interact with that? Am I going to do these lines just in the same direction and just make it sort of darker? Or am I going to change the angle slightly or a lot and actually help create a different effect, perhaps even a different feel of the curvature? And now I want to place a little more attention up around the neck, around the throat. I look at this white section and work out that it's not quite as well shaped as it could be, and it helps to define the head as well and the turn of the head. So I end up doing some more work on that, and I decide that the lighter sections are still too light here really for what I want. Hatching, cross-hatching, it's a great drawing technique when we just have a pen and we want to really create some effects, and it can be a very satisfying thing to do when the general outlining is done, when we've got the limits of our form and we're now creating the real three-dimensionality of it, when perhaps some of the pressure is off us and we can really just enjoy the process. Just a little bit of darkening around the eye to hopefully make the very faint white parts stand out a bit more. And now again, I'm just checking my angles around under the neck. I found that as I went on, I became perhaps more attuned to the curvature of the bird and therefore better able to see curves, to see the underlying form than when I first started, which of course created adjustments all over the place. But for me, this is the satisfying part of the drawing, so there was no problem. But I think with birds, the temptation is to go for outline before we understand the form. And that's why a lot of birds end up looking a bit lumpy. They look a bit misshapen because if our lines, our curves aren't precise, and if the lines on each side of the bird don't align properly, then it doesn't create the reality that we're expecting to see, that we intuitively have in the back of our mind from all the birds that we have seen in life. So here I just make these adjustments to this white feathering on the neck. And I just sharpen the angle of that line a little bit. A little more emphasis around the throat, and I think we're done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this helpful. Birds are incredibly beautiful creatures and they are wonderful subjects to draw. They're not so straightforward in lots of ways, but they give a lot of opportunity to explore a lot of technique, whether we're in black and white or in colour, and particularly in cross-hatching. We can create a black bird with a pen, with a 0.3 millimeter pen. You'll find this reference on my channel community page. I hope you have a go drawing this Australian magpie. But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have fun, and why not have a go cross-hatching it as well. I'll see you next time. Bye.